Well, how is everyone doing right now after all the sessions for our first day of the event here, or all the insights and knowledge that we have been sharing from our international speakers? This is the time we've all been waiting for the live Q&A sessions. So if there's any questions you have been listing down since the beginning, now is the time. Well, before we start this live Q&A sessions here, I just want to briefly take a few seconds of your time here to introduce, because we have an honorable moderator to join us for these sessions as well. So in these sessions, we have welcoming Dr. Montira Unakun as the moderator, which she is from UNESCO Bangkok, and she works as the programs within the Asia Pacific region related to the safeguarding and sustainable development of cultural heritage. With a focus on world heritage, she has authored and edited publications related to heritage management and urbanism and sustainable tourism. So today, we are honored to have Dr. Montira as our moderator to join us for the live Q&A sessions. Thank you very much. We have Dr. Montira here up on the screen. สวัสดีค่ะ
So thank you very much to our audience and to the ASA organizing team once again. And a big round of applause at this point to our three distinguished speakers, starting from Mr. Lawrence Loh from Malaysia, Mr. Alan Croker from Australia, and Mr. Sang-Yul Yu from Korea. I think I speak on behalf of the whole audience. And I shared one person's sentiment just now that after one of the talks, he sat in front of his screen clapping, I think, with delight after having heard one of the talks. And so there's another part of our audience that is going online to book tickets to Penang, Sydney, and Seoul as we speak. And so as soon as the pandemic is over, you'll have these hordes of fans at your office doors seeking personalized tours of the Sydney Opera House and the Blue Mansion and the Korea Seoul City Wall, I'm sure. So at this point in time, we'd like to open the floor in order to take a number of questions that have come up throughout the course of the videos. And so I'll go in turn, starting from our first speaker, Mr. Lawrence Loh. There's a question that has been raised about the forms of community involvement throughout your project. Even though the project was privately undertaken, it was really seminal in changing the conservation rhetoric and practice and even legal policy framework in Penang. So can you tell us a little bit more about community involvement at the start of the project, but even as the project continues to flourish 20 years after its original restoration?
Well, there were certain milestones when we first bought the building to restore it and to save it basically from the development movement in Penang. People were actually very curious about what we were doing, because in 1990, the conservation movement hadn't taken off yet. So we told the public, we actually just bought the building, got together a few people who were of same ilk to save the building. We didn't know what we wanted to do with it, but basically it's to keep it for. So over time, they saw it as a CSR project. And we said, really, we don't have very much money. And the house is empty. Furniture there was in the house, right? And so people started, I've got, and they just started contributing different things to the house, thinking that they were actually doing us a favor. And it was also at that time where development in Penang was really just getting off, so people were moving into apartments and didn't have place to place their furniture. So it began this journey of donations and loans. So we furnished the place. We actually went to different people and said, can you lend us your furniture? So in fact, 99% of all the furniture in the main building is actually on loan or donated. And really that's the community sort of participation that took part very early on in the project, right? But I think that a nice turning point, building next door was being renovated, and they were piling to put up a 22-story tower, a hotel. The heritage community, and we had a huge demonstration in front of the building, right? And in fact, we wrote to all our friends from UNESCO, if Richard Inglehart remembers, to America, to Australia, and we asked everybody to write into the government to say, actually, please stop the piling that's going on next door and try and help us save the building. So these were just a few of the community incidences that happened.
Great, thank you very much to Mr. Lowe. Now we'll hand over to Mr. Croker. There's been a couple extra questions, and so I might summarize into a joint question, which is, can you tell us a little bit about the technology that has been used in the conservation work, including the application of BIM, building information modeling software, as well as the role of teamwork, particularly in managing all the various technical consultants in a very complex setting?
Okay, very interesting question. In the conservation work, conservation is really not separable at the Opera House from what we normally do with any of the work there. So in actually planning and designing and executing any work down there, the BIM modeling system and the BIM technology is very important for us because the building has such incredibly complex geometry. Something like that is required. But I'm afraid I'm a little bit old school, and I like to turn up with the tape measure and go and look at the spaces myself. And we've had a number of instances where we've found that the BIM model has been a little bit inaccurate because it's been so difficult to get into some of the spaces to actually do the scanning. But the BIM model has been essential, particularly for understanding the services, because if we don't get the services right, then our major spaces and our functions don't work properly. So it has been a fundamental tool, and it is now being also extended to incorporate the records of what's been done in each space, particularly with conservation or what the issues might be. And they are also looking at linking the conservation management plan and sections of that with particular spaces. So when you go into the model and look at a particular space, there should be a link there which takes you back to the conservation management plan. So it's quite an intriguing system. I think, was there another part to your question that I may have missed?
And then the second part to that was the issue of teamwork. You talked about the role of, say, acoustic engineers and a variety of other people. How is that all managed?
Sometimes the meeting room was not quite big enough. So we've had consultants from all over the place. So we have a team of consultants from Europe, and the acoustic engineers, the manufacturers of the stage machinery and all the theatre equipment are in, I'm not quite sure whether it's Germany or Austria. I think it's Austria, Wagner Bureau. And then we have stage or theatre designers who are in England. And we have architects who are in Melbourne on the concert hall project. We have consultants all over the place, and we all need to be in the same room. And I've found that when the wheel falls off on some particular issue, it's because somebody wasn't included in that. And I really have to emphasize how important it is that with these larger projects, that they are not what we refer to as being put in silos, so in separate little boxes. You need to take the walls down between the boxes, get everybody together to discuss the problem, because there may be issues which are very serious conservation issues or may have very serious implications in terms of the Utzon design principles, which say an electrical engineer or a mechanical engineer may not be aware of, and they're making decisions in isolation. That must be avoided. You really have to look at the whole project holistically, and with the huge teams that we've got, we have to get together, and that's how it works.
Thank you very much, Mr. Croker. And so now we go to Mr. Yu with your compelling case study from Seoul and various types of heritage-related projects in Seoul. There's a question about, can you tell us how cultural heritage conservation and contemporary new design, particularly architectural design, interface in Seoul or in the Korean context? And if there are kind of either the guidelines from the profession or from the government, and how that works in practice. Mr. Yu, maybe you need to turn on your microphone.
So, Dr. Montera, your question is about when we renovate or rebuild the heritage building, at the time, how the new technique and new material is interfered. That's it correct?
Me too.
I'm asking a question on behalf of one of the audience members, and the question in Korea, which is quite a broad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a little bit difficult to explain for me in English. I try. There are two things. One thing, as like the case of Seoul City Wall. In this case, is one of the cases to restore it in origin the form, because we do not use this facility to other function. So we try to, by research, how is the technique in older times, not at this times. When we cut the stone, for example, we do not use the modern material, modern technique. We use completely when it was done 400 years, 500 years ago. But for the case of Namseol Museum of Art, in this case, the function is different. In the older times, it was built for Belgian consulate, but now it is used for the museum. So in this case, we remodel, we change the room. For example, the room is too small for the exhibition. We made the big room unified the too small like this one, and also for the windows and the heating system like this one, we use, of course, the nowadays technique. And the third case, the Gongpyeongdong Historic Site. In this case, it's the first time we restored like this type, because on the earth of the Seoul city, there are many historical relics. So we reconstruct for new building. We undug the ground. We can find the earlier times of the relics. For this case, there are several cultural layers were found from 16th century, 7th century, 18th century, and 100 years ago. For this case, 16th century's cultural layer was found in the form of good situation. So they decided to restore this cultural layer, include alleyways at the time and some houses. But we should construct completely new building, 5 below the level, the 30 floors above the level. So we asked to the developer give to use basement floor fully to restore the 60th century's relics. In doing that, Seoul government city made some guidelines. As like first guideline, architectural design that take into account the location of varied cultural property. And the second guideline, encourage voluntary participation of project operator by granting flow ratio based incentive that accord with the preservation area of varied cultural property. And third rule, they made the guideline to construct the historic site museum. And the first rule, after the construction of a historic site museum, it is in charge of preservation and management of the historic site museum by Seoul city government. Yeah, is it good for your question, I hope?
Thank you very much. I mean, I think that gives us a more detailed understanding of the background behind those projects. Perhaps now, in the interest of limited time that we have left, I'll open the floor to maybe a joint discussion between our 3 speakers. You may remember, well, I don't remember it because I wasn't born yet, but in the mid-1960s at the New York Museum of Modern Art, there was a famous exhibition called Architecture Without Architects, which looked at the role of vernacular architecture. And at the time it was, sort of the heyday of high modernist architecture. And so we have within our talk today, maybe kind of a good snapshot of the challenges that face us. On the one hand, we have, a globally iconic building like the Sydney Opera House, which is loved and cherished and argued about and so forth, but so very much in the public consciousness for people who are not even architects. And then on the other hand, we have sort of, the layers, centuries of history and occupation and building in a place like Seoul, some of which are sort of major city infrastructure like walls, but some of them are quite simple residential structures and neighborhoods. And then we have what is called the high vernacular, perhaps the Blue Mansion, an example of very elite architecture from a certain historic period. So obviously, when one works at a building like the Sydney Opera House, one has maybe, Jan Utzorn looking down on you, over your shoulders all the time, or you have that feeling that, eyes are very much on you as you do the work, and versus, buildings where maybe there is no architect of record, there are no historic building plans and so forth, but they're produced as a whole, as a product of a whole tradition of building, which in itself has a dignity and an identity. How would you comment upon the different contexts of working when you have an extremely well documented, well recognized building versus a building that has emerged in a way from a grassroots tradition? starting maybe with Alan first, and then coming to Lawrence, and then Mr. Yu.
That's a hot seat. I think with something like the Opera House, where you have a singular idea by a remarkable mind, really. And I noticed the last speaker speaking about Seoul showed those images of Zaha Hadid's structure. That is a singular mind. That's not a vernacular construction. And this, I think that's the power of the Opera House, was that it was a singular mind, a singular idea, and all of the people were gathered together who had knowledge and skills who could help him execute that idea. That was fundamental to it. Because if you don't have those tradesmen, if you don't have those technicians, if you don't have those systems of design like computers, then you will not be able to do it. And I guess that's where I would see the role of the vernacular, in a sense, was the skill of the tradesman and the skill of ingenuity that was brought into that project. This was the first project to use computerization as a major design tool anywhere in the world. So it's, vernacular is one of those things that it's an inheritance. It's what we bring from our culture as a practice to construct something. And we use that knowledge which has been handed down to us to construct these things which are known to us. And in many ways, Utsin's idea brought back some understanding of this place that is Bennelong Point in Sydney Harbour, an understanding of that place which was almost Aboriginal in its execution. He brought back a celebration of that site which had not existed since the white men arrived in this country. Fairly roundabout way of answering the question, but
thank you. I think that was very interesting that you connected it with the essence of building traditions, really, and also the importance of place. Perhaps we'll go a roundabout to Mr. Yu and then end with Lawrence, if you don't mind.
Okay.
How do we celebrate vernacular architecture and vernacular building tradition in comparison with more structured ways of conservation and building? Maybe that's a question for Mr. Yu.
I'd like to take an example for the case of the Seoul City Wall. In 20th century, for 100 years, Korean people had been very severe life. In the beginning of the 20th century, Korea was annexed by Japan for 35 years. Just after that, Korea had the Korean War between North and South Korea. After that, until 1917, Korea was one of the poorest country in the world. But it's recent case, the Korean people and the Korean government started interested in preservation and restore the heritage. Really, the recent the cases here. During these hard times, some inhabitants lives on the wall of the city wall still now. They build a house, or they build the community building like this one. So in demanding the UNESCO heritage to be listed for the city wall, at the first time, the Seoul city government tried to demolish this vulnerable the building the houses and buildings. But now they changed their aim. They change preserve these vernacular the houses and buildings, and the live together with this building and all the heritage. So it has changed the point of view now in Korea.
Thank you very much. So now we have the final word from Lawrence. Is it easier or harder to work in a context where you don't have the original blueprints, quotes from the original architect and so forth, but you have several thousands of years of Chinese building tradition bearing upon you?
Well, I start with the premise that whether it's vernacular, whether it's heritage architecture, or whether it's new architecture, it starts with the design. It starts with the concept of design, right? So I always speak about time and space and design. And even the earliest buildings required you to design it. So I see it as a seamless timeline. In fact, once you look at vernacular architecture, there is a blueprint which has been developed over a long period of time based on traditions, users, customs, etc. Right? And so you get different variations of a vernacular building. Maybe the porch is in a different position, but ultimately the organization is still the same. So I think that is differentiates human beings from the other animal world, so to speak, you know. So design, right? And if you look at Cheong Fat Si mentioned, there was no architect, but there was a chief feng shui master who knew the principles of laying out an environment to give you perfect energy. You apply that to a modern building with the use of computers, you're almost inputting the same intuitive elements as people in the past, right? So it's actually developing our ability to design in different ways, but the process mentally is just as intricate, you know? And very new buildings, and we restore very old buildings and everything in between. And I think the advent of what they like to call parametric design and things like that, or last century, but started a long time ago. It's just that we were looking in the early days at organic forms, and we use these organic forms to inform on design, right? It's now that we have the machines to do it for us. But can you imagine that if you look at any of the sculptures, any of the structures, the cathedrals, etc., they had exactly the same intuitive mathematical ability, right? And then you filter it down to Buckminster Fuller, who wasn't even an architect, but a naval engineer. But he ended up, you know, designing something as intricate as the Sydney Opera House. It's a whole parcel, a whole, you know, bundle of the same way of thinking.
Thank you, Lawrence. I think that is a perfect summary for our 3 opening sessions today, looking at design, looking at kind of design traditions that have been handed down and sort of their culmination into a present day contemporary architecture. So we'll continue our conversation tomorrow. We're lucky to have Lawrence, Alan, and Sung-Yul join us again for the closing panel discussion. And so now I'd like to thank you very much. Thank the audience for your continued participation, and then hand the floor back to the ASA forum team.
Okay, thank you, Montira. Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
See you tomorrow.
We enjoyed.
Thank you very much, everyone, once again. But don't go anywhere. I think this is a very memorable picture that we have on the frame right now, that all four, three of our international speakers and our moderator on the screen. So I think here for our online platform this year, it's a new normal. So let's take some photos together with all four of you on the screen. So the best thing I need you to do for me is give a big smile, and I'll have my photographer up here taking lovely photos of all four of you. We'll just take a few seconds. Yes, that's the kind of smile I want from everyone. Okay, great. Everyone is looking very, very good. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, all of our international speakers and our moderator. Thank you once again. And as we mentioned that today has coming to an end of our first day of our ASA Forum 2021. And I hope everyone had all the great insight and all the knowledge that has been shared from our international speakers and our honorable moderator as well from the live Q&A sessions. Just to remind you, tomorrow, one more day for our conference where everyone can join us. All three channels that you can join us, you can log on to the website from worldwideweb.asaexpo.org/forum-2021, where on that website, you can use the same password and the same username. And don't forget that all the handouts and the documents will be available on the website itself. Not only that, you can also use your Facebook. Log on to Facebook at facebook.com/ASA Architect Exposition. That's another way to join us for this conference as well. And one last channel, you can also log on to YouTube. So search for ASA's channel and you can enjoy the conference as well. For tomorrow, don't forget that we have special highlights even waiting for everyone for the panel discussions, when we also have session E, session F waiting as well. And it starts same time. We start from 2 p.m. until 5 p.m. going onward. So we wish to see you again tomorrow. And thank you very much from all of our supporters. Thank you to all of our participants that are watching from all over the world. Well, have a great evening for all of those in Thailand and in the same range of area here. See you tomorrow. Thank you very much. ขอบคุณค่ะ